Hey there, it's Gunnar, Esiason, and thanks for joining Julia and I for episode 3 of the Making It Matter podcast series, Vacation and Travel Tips.
Hi, everyone. Making It Matter is a bi-monthly podcast with your hosts, Gunnar Esiason, and me, Julia Rae, presented by the Boomer Esiason Foundation and GunnarEsiason.com, highlighting the challenges that people with CF face and the people who face them.
Since Julia and I both have cystic fibrosis, we are remaining compliant with the National Cystic Fibrosis Guidelines regarding patient interaction and cross-infection by recording via Skype. This podcast was made possible by an unrestricted educational grant from Novartis to the Boomer Esiason Foundation. And as always, the views expressed on the Making It Matter podcast are that of Gunnar Esiason, Julia Rae, and guests, and not necessarily those of the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Nothing in the Make It Matter podcast series should be considered medical advice. Such advice can only be given by a physician who's experienced with cystic fibrosis. The Boomer Esiason Foundation, Gunnar Esiason, Julia Rae, and guests cannot be held responsible for any damage which may result from using the information on this podcast without the permission of your medical doctor. You're listening to the Make It Matter podcast with Gunnar Esiason and Julia Rae, presented by the Boomer Esiason Foundation and GunnarEsiason.com. Summer's in full swing, Julia, so I want to circle back on a blog that I wrote about a year and a half ago, Travel and Vacation Tips. So this past June, I had a bunch of trips. We had a foundation fundraisers in Kentucky, one in New Hampshire. I gave a speech in Boston, so I was doing a lot of traveling, and I figured it would be a great time to talk about some travel tips. So what do you think?
I think you're right. I know I'm always on the go, especially when I was Miss Philadelphia. I was in Philly and New York for college courses, so constantly on the go, and I think I managed pretty well as far as figuring out how to travel with CF. But what are your tips for airport safety?
Okay. So when I'm in an airport, I always like to wear a surgical mask, especially during flu season. I think that's a must. There's a lot of people coughing. A lot of people just have no idea of the surroundings. I think that's really important to get a handle of. Do you wear a surgical mask?
I have before, yeah, and especially in the closed quarters of an airplane and the recycled air. It's wise to do so.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Do flights bother you in general? Do you have trouble with the altitude or things like that?
Yeah, especially with my sinuses. I'm always sure to kind of prep for that in days ahead too. Like I'll do Afrin, just like open everything up. So yeah, for sure they bother me.
Yeah, no, I always like to do like little saline nasal sprays right before I get on the airplane. Obviously looks like your nose is like dripping with gross stuff, but I think it's totally worth it in the long run. But as far as flights, like I think if I have like a long flight over 6 hours, I'll start to notice it, especially when I land. After a couple hours, I notice that I cough a lot of stuff up. But yeah, I know I've never really had trouble with the altitude. I don't think. One time I actually went skiing. I think I had one issue when I was probably in high school with the altitude. But other than that, flying really has not given me an issue. I just try to stay out of airplanes when it's flu season because it's just gross. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think overall the problems that flights present are pretty manageable.
Yes, they are, especially with carrying the equipment onto the airplane. I've realized that with CF you can actually ask for priority boarding. You can do that. So when I'm traveling with, especially the vest or something big like that, I try to get on the plane first, so I'm not hassling everyone in the aisle as far as getting something in the overhead compartment. I always bring all of my meds in a carry-on bag rather than checked baggage, because if something gets lost, then you're screwed.
Yeah.
And then for the vest, the vest sometimes is too big for like maybe a weekend trip. I'll bring something smaller. I also actually happen to have a frequencer, which is a lot smaller than a vest, so that fits in an overhead compartment pretty good, rather than trying to jam something in there.
Yeah. And speaking of like weekend trips versus week-long trips, what about where do you go?
Yeah, so I remember actually back to college when we were talking about spring break with my friends. We chose the Bahamas because A, it was a little more affordable, but B, I think I, along with my parents and my doctors, felt safer about me going to the Bahamas than, say, Mexico, where if you drink the water, you'll have Montezuma's Revenge, or the Dominican Republic, where you may have some trouble if there's an issue, an emergency, or something like that. Have you had any situations?
Yeah, that was always the big rule for me for my spring break. So, and I'm glad that I listened to my parents on the domestic travel rule, because I went to Key West for one spring break, and I did have a minor emergency. Not CF related at all. It dislocated my knee completely. So
that's painful.
Yeah, it was.
That is excruciatingly painful.
Oh, for sure. And I don't typically curse, and there were several curse words coming out of my mouth.
Oh, I can only imagine. Can only imagine how that. Yeah. So I think when it comes down to traveling, I think it's important to go somewhere that's both manageable as far as flight time and distance. Because if you're traveling for over 24 hours, realistically, how are you going to get your treatments done? I've seen pictures of people doing their meds in the airport, but at the same time, it's not very clean in there.
Right.
But at the same time, you don't want to live in a bubble. So I think it's important to get out and move around and stuff like that. I've been fortunate enough to go over to Europe before, and what I did there was rather than flying directly to somewhere so far away, we stayed a few days in one country and then moved to another country a few days later. So that's
I've done the same.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to do it, rather than flying all hours through the night, through the day. I think that's just the way to do it. Especially since there's a lot of different moving parts, especially as far as travel and baggage and stuff like that goes. For me, with the feeding tube, it's important to get the formula from place to place. That's something that has to be checked, unfortunately. So we had to know where that bag was at all times. That's not like something that can get lost, because then if it does, then what are you going to do? You're in Europe. How are you going to get help?
Right. Yeah. A lot of things to think through, but having a good checklist helps too.
Exactly. So what's on your checklist?
Portable nebulizer for sure. That is a lifesaver. That changed everything for me as far as, especially weekend trips or trips for speaking engagements. And I do it all the time. I mean, I have done my portable nebulizer in the airport, especially if I'm going from an event to one weekend. I had 2 different events in 2 different cities. So I was going from North Carolina to Texas.
Oh.
And yeah, I needed to just get it done where I could. And that makes it so much easier.
Yeah, the portable nebulizer is awesome. I actually used that in high school. That was I had like a 25, 30-minute commute to school in the morning, so that cut down on really stress. I didn't have to wake up a full hour earlier than I really had to. I was able to do a lot of my treatments on the car ride to school. I still use the traveling nebulizer really just about whenever I have to get up super early in the morning for something. Playing hockey, that's something that ice time is usually available at like 6 a.m., things like that. So rather than getting up a full hour and a half before I need to be there, I get up the last possible second, just throw everything in the car, and away I go. So the travel nebulizer is pretty good. The other thing that I recently started doing is I started buying disposable nebs. So I, rather than having to bring stuff to clean my nebs with, I bring these plastic one-use nebs. They look a lot like what you get in a hospital admission. And those are pretty great. They take up a lot of space, but what I say is whenever I'm traveling, I'm pretty consumable. So I'm coming back with a pretty light bag comparatively.
Yeah, that's so smart. I'm learning something new.
Yes, the disposable nebs are awesome, and they're not very expensive. They're one of those things where you can buy like in bulk, and they're pretty cheap. So what I do is I just buy in bulk, and then I just stash them.
So worth it too. You just get rid of it when you're done, and
because then you don't have to fly with the rubbing alcohol. You can stay under the 3-ounce rule, whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have to bring the soap. You don't have to bring a kettle to boil water, things like that. It's actually awesome. I just started recently doing that, really within the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's so smart. Love it.
Cool. So as far as anything else that we have to do with travel, are you someone that can do a long car ride, or do you have trouble with car rides? I know some people love doing giant road trips. Or do you have issues with that, or would you prefer that to a plane, actually?
Yeah, I love long car rides, given that I've driven across the country 3 times.
Wow, really?
Yeah. But there again, the portable nebulizer is the lifesaver. I mean, because it's so easy to just do in the comfort of your own car, driving across the country.
Where did you go, and when did you do these?
It was when I was moving to and from Los Angeles. So I was 17. Yeah. Oh, one time on the way back I had a PICC line. So I was able to do my PICC line on the way home too. So.
Yeah, I've definitely done the PICC line on the airplane before. That'll definitely draw quite a few looks. I actually, my senior year, my senior year of college, when I went to spring break, I happened to have a PICC line in, and the doctor made it very clear that he felt that he wanted me to go on spring break just so I could experience it. So he totally gave me his blessing to go with a PICC line, and I very vividly remember starting an infusion and drawing quite a few looks from some concerned passengers. But that was quite the experience. But I did it, and I definitely think that I learned and proved to myself that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what people think. It's all about what's best for you.
Yeah. There you go. And you still got to experience your spring break.
Yes, exactly. It was quite a little bit of a hectic trip, but I got it done, including the medicine. All right. So, anything else that you want to throw in there about some travel tips that you have, as far as what you might need from a doctor beforehand, or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I always have prednisone on me just in case. I feel like I need that extra little jolt while I'm away, just because it's a headache sometimes to call in that or an antibiotic or an oral antibiotic while you're away, and figuring all of that out, especially when you're in a different time zone.
Yeah, I
definitely have
for sure.
backup plans.
Yeah, I definitely like to have some stuff on me just in case. I think just from over the years, I've probably accumulated some extra doses of antibiotics, things like that have just built up. And, I think those are something that I can definitely put to use, especially if I'm somewhere away or even internationally, things where you may not be able to get hold of something. So those are definitely good things to have as far as antibiotics, extra pills, things like that. And then I also make sure I always have a letter of medical need from my doctor in case I ever run into trouble with security. I think if I had $1 for every time I've been searched at the security line for my nebulizer or an ice bag or something like that, I think I'd be floating in cash right now. But that's all. It always definitely raises a couple eyes. But as soon as I hand the letter of medical need to the TSA or something like that, they handle it pretty well, I think.
Yeah. Well, speaking of travel and going to different countries, I think I would like to highlight a specific person who is spreading a lot of positive energy and hope throughout the world for our Making It Matter segment. Summer Love not only has the coolest name, but she's a 37-year-old with cystic fibrosis and started Love to Breathe, which is an organization with the mission to just spread hope and positive energy, not only to the cystic fibrosis community, but beyond. And in just 2 years, she's spread these Love to Breathe tokens, 6,000 of them in 42 countries. And she likes to say 21% of the world is now breathing out love. And you can check out where the tokens have been. You can go to hashtag Love to Breathe tokens. So thanks for spreading the love, Summer.
Yeah, Summer does a great job. Awesome advocacy work. Very admirable. So, Summer, you're definitely making it matter. And that's really all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for our third episode of Making It Matter. Remember, you can follow along with our bi-monthly podcast via my YouTube channel on GunnarEsiason.com, JuliaRae.com, or our respective Facebook-like pages. If you want to see us podcast about something specific, you can always send us an email at gunnarsblog@esiason.org or send us a message on Facebook. We'd love to chat, as you can tell. This is Gunnar, Esiason, and Julia Rae signing off.